Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Okay, here is the document you provided organized into a subtitle file-like format, one sentence per line, unchanged from the original. Seattle nights always carry a hint of moist coolness, even in the height of summer. Richard Kessler placed one grilled steak on the plate in front of Heather and another on his son Taylor's plate. The table was set with baked potatoes, vegetable salad, and an open bottle of red wine. Taylor's favorite family dinner and his and Heather's wedding anniversary. Taylor excitedly sliced her steak with a table knife, while Heather just absent-mindedly fiddled with her plate, the light from her cell phone screen reflecting off her face in flashes. "How does it taste, dear?" Richard asked gently, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. Heather looked up, seemingly only just coming back to her senses, and managed to squeeze out a small smile. "Oh, great, Richard. Thank you." Her eyes drifted a little, her fingers unconsciously sliding across the screen of her cell phone. A twinge of unease swept through Richard's mind, not for the first time. In recent months, Heather has always been this distracted and has paid less and less attention to her family. She began to work overtime and travel frequently, always with the excuse that the company's projects were reaching a critical period. Richard understands the pressures of being the director of marketing for Avalon Technologies, a well-known Seattle tech company known for its breakthroughs in quantum computing. But Heather's change is more than just a busy schedule at work. It's more like a deliberate detachment. Dinner ended on a depressing note, with Richard clearing the table after Taylor went to her room to do her homework. Heather then took her cell phone and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. As Richard washed the dishes, Heather's recent antics kept coming to mind. She always had her cell phone set to silent and her password changed. In the past, their cell phones were off-limits to each other. But now, Heather's phone is a no-go zone. "Maybe I should talk to her," Richard said to himself, but then dismissed the idea. A tacit understanding seemed to have developed between them, each carefully avoiding certain questions for fear of upsetting the fragile balance. Over the next few weeks, Richard became increasingly uneasy. He begins to secretly observe Heather's behavior, trying to find out why she's alienating herself. He notices that Heather is often secretly texting and calling late at night and avoids him on every call. Some large, unexplained expenditures also appeared in her spending records. Richard's mind is filled with doubt and unease, and he even begins to wonder if Heather is having an affair. The thought sent a wave of palpitations and nausea through him. One Saturday afternoon, Richard took Taylor to the park to play frisbee. Taylor had a great time, but Richard was always preoccupied. He overheard the intimacy between a young father and his own wife, and the image made him feel bad. He suddenly realized that it had been a long time since he and Heather had had such intimate interactions with each other. "Dad, what's wrong with you?" Taylor asked with concern as she noticed something different about Richard. "It's okay, son." Richard forced a smile. "Let's go home." When they get home, Richard excuses himself to deal with work emails and leaves Taylor to her own devices. Alone, he went into his study and turned on his computer. He knew that he had to find the truth, even if that truth would cause him pain. Richard started trying to start with the company's financial statements. As a senior software engineer, he is familiar with the company's business processes and knows the ins and outs of financial data. He logged into the company's financial system and scrutinized every account. He discovered suspicious movements of funds, with large sums being paid to a company called Innovate Solutions in the form of consultancy fees, but with no corresponding contracts or reports. Further investigation revealed that the company was actually registered to the company's marketing director, Brian. Richard felt a wave of vertigo as Brian's name exploded like a bomb in his head. He thought back to the annual meeting when he'd seen Brian and Heather whispering in the corner, Brian's hand touching Heather's arm from time to time. In retrospect, the ambiguity sent shivers down Richard's spine. To confirm his suspicions, Richard decides to start with Heather's old cell phone. After Heather got a new cell phone, the old one has been sitting in storage. He rummaged through the box and finally found the forgotten white cell phone. Luckily, the phone still had some power left. He tried several of Heather's usual password combinations and surprisingly managed to unlock it. A flurry of text messages and call logs popped up on his cell phone screen, and Richard shuddered as he tapped on the texts. His conversation with Brian sending a wave of nausea and anger through him. The explicit words of love, the intimate terms of endearment, and their visions of the future completely shatter Richard's trust in Heather. So that's the truth. Richard closed his eyes in agony as he felt his world falling apart. Just then, he suddenly remembered someone, Catherine Olson. Catherine was an early investor in Avalon and a close friend of Richard's father during his lifetime. Richard's father was a great help to Catherine in the early days of Avalon, and the two developed a strong friendship. Catherine is a wise and influential woman. Perhaps she can give him some advice. The next day, Richard brings the evidence and makes an appointment to meet with Catherine. At Catherine's luxury apartment in the center of town, Richard tells her about his discovery and shows her the evidence he has gathered. Catherine listened quietly, her brow furrowed. "Richard, I'm sorry to hear that." Catherine sighed. "Your father, if he were alive, would not want to see something like this happen." "Catherine, I don't know what to do." Richard's voice was filled with confusion and pain. "I love Heather, but I can't stand her betrayal. Besides, they're using the company's resources for personal gain, which is a crime against Avalon. You did the right thing, son. You must protect yourself, your son, and the cause your father once fought for." Catherine's eyes grew determined. "I'll be there for you, Richard. I'll use every resource I have to help you through this." Leaving Catherine's apartment, Richard feels a glimmer of hope. He knew that he was no longer alone. He begins to formulate a plan for revenge, and he's going to make Heather and Brian pay for what they've done. He first contacted several of the company's senior engineers, all of whom had been his colleagues and friends for many years and had been unhappy with the state of the company for a long time. "We need to change Avalon. We need to get it back on track." Richard told them, "We need your help." Over the next few weeks, Richard met secretly with these engineers to discuss the direction of the company's technology and to develop a series of changes. He promised to give these engineers more support and trust once he took control of the company. Meanwhile, Richard is secretly watching Heather and Brian's every move. He discovers that they've been planning a big move lately and seem to be preparing to jump ship to a competitor with the company's confidential information. Richard sneered, knowing that his chance had come. On a moonlit night, Richard made a reservation at Carlton's and invited Heather, Brian, and several key board members. Carlton's is Heather's favorite restaurant and a place she often uses to show off and socialize. Richard knew that this would be the place where his plan for revenge would begin. Halfway through dinner, Richard tapped his wine glass gently to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some things about the company." Richard's tone was calm and strong, but his eyes were as sharp as a blade. "Recently, I've discovered some very serious problems that concern the future of the company, as well as every one of us here." Heather and Brian's faces instantly turned pale, and they glanced nervously at each other as if they had a premonition of what was to come. Richard looked around the room and said, word for word, "I found out that someone used his position to embezzle the company's assets, betrayed the company's interests, and even planned to steal the company's confidential information and defect to a competitor." He paused, his eyes lingering on Heather and Brian for a few seconds before continuing. "What I can't stand even more is that these two men, they also betrayed their families and their loved ones." The restaurant was in an uproar as everyone looked at Richard and Heather and Brian beside him, in shock. Richard pulled a stack of papers out of his briefcase and placed them on the table. "Here, there's all the evidence," he said coldly, including records of communications between them, anomalies in their financial statements, and records of their contacts with competitors. Heather's face turned red as she jerked to her feet and pointed at Richard. "Richard, are you crazy? What are you babbling about?" Brian tried to defend himself as well. "Richard, you're libelous. I'll sue you." "Enough." Catherine Olson's voice suddenly rang out as she slowly rose to her feet, her gaze sweeping majestically over everyone in the room. "Richard is telling the truth, and I can attest to all of this in my capacity as a director of Avalon and as an old friend of Richard's father." There was dead silence in the restaurant as everyone was stunned by the sudden turn of events. Richard looked at Heather and Brian. There was no anger or sadness in his eyes, just an icy calm. "Heather, Brian, you were fired." Richard's voice wasn't loud, but it reached everyone clearly. From now on, you have nothing to do with Avalon. It was an unusually cloudy night in Seattle, and a storm was coming. And Richard knows that his revenge, which belongs to him, is just kicking off. He looked out the window at the flashing neon lights and said to himself, "This is just the beginning, and I will make you pay for it." The air in Carlton's restaurant seemed to freeze, and the ornate glow of the chandeliers couldn't hide the horror on Heather and Brian's faces. Richard's words were like sharp knives, piercing their carefully woven lies and exposing their bloody betrayal for all to see. Catherine Olson's testimony was more than enough to completely destroy their last hope. "Security," Richard shouted calmly. Two security guards in black uniforms quickly walked over and stood behind Heather and Brian. "Take them out." Richard's voice was so cold that it didn't carry a trace of emotion. "And notify the legal department to immediately freeze their company accounts and all their privileges, forbidding them from entering the company building again, as well as any form of contact with the company's employees. File a lawsuit against them and pursue their legal responsibilities." Heather tried to argue, but Brian was surprisingly silent. He knew that it was all over. Everything they've worked so hard for has come to naught this night. The rest of the board looked at each other. Some of them had been close to Heather and Brian, but at the moment, no one dared to say a word for them. After all, the evidence in Richard's hands was overwhelming, and Catherine Olson's statement completely took the wind out of the sails of this farce. After this sudden storm, some calm returned to the restaurant. Richard apologized to the board members, thanked them for attending, and said that an emergency meeting would be held at the company tomorrow to discuss in detail the future direction of the company. The directors leave one by one, and Catherine Olson walks over to Richard and pats him gently on the shoulder. "You did well, Richard," she whispered. "Your father would be proud of you." Richard nodded without speaking. He watched Catherine leave, then sat alone at the dining room table, looking out the window at the night view of Seattle and thinking. The next day, a tense atmosphere gripped the headquarters of Avalon Technologies. The employees are whispering and speculating about what happened last night. Richard showed up on time and walked right into the conference room, which was already filled with the company's top executives. "Gentlemen," Richard's voice was clear and firm, "I know you all have a lot of questions about what happened last night. Today, I'm going to explain everything." Richard details his discovery of Heather and Brian's betrayal of the company and family and all the evidence he gathered. He did not add fuel to the fire, nor did he deliberately sensationalize the situation. He just stated the facts objectively. "I must emphasize that I am very distressed by Heather and Brian's actions, but I am even more distressed by their betrayal of the company." Richard said, "As employees of Avalon, each of us has a responsibility to safeguard the company's interests and protect its secrets. They, on the other hand, utilized the company's resources for personal gain and were even prepared to sell the company's core technology to competitors. This is absolutely intolerable." There was silence in the conference room as everyone was shocked by Richard's words. Some of them had worked with Heather and Brian for years, and they couldn't believe that these two could do such a thing. "Starting today, I will temporarily take over the position of CEO and be responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company," Richard continued. "I know that the company is at a critical juncture, and we need to work together as one. I hope that everyone will support me and join me in leading Avalon to a brighter future." The room erupted in applause at the end of Richard's presentation. The employees were impressed by Richard's sincerity and determination to believe in the man on the brink and to join him in the fight for Avalon's future. Over the next month, Richard launched a series of thunderous reforms. He began with a full audit of the company's finances, thoroughly clearing up the mess Heather and Brian had left behind. He discovers that the company's finances are in worse shape than he expected, and that Heather and Brian have not only misappropriated a large amount of the company's assets, but also left behind a huge pile of debt. In order to stabilize the situation, Richard, on one hand, actively communicated with banks and suppliers to gain their understanding and support. On the other hand, he started to lay off employees and reorganize to reduce operating costs. It was a difficult time, with a lot of anxiety within the company and skepticism from the outside. But Richard remained calm and determined, knowing that this was a bout that Avalon had to go through. Meanwhile, Richard has begun to implement his plan of disassociation. He knew that Heather and Brian were down and out now, but their relationship wasn't completely broken. It is still possible that they will join forces to fight back and even put all the blame on him. To prevent this, Richard must turn them against each other. Richard anonymously sends Heather specially manipulated photos showing Brian on dates with various women. The photos are actually composites Richard made from images on the open web, but they look very realistic. He also included an anonymous note that read, "Brian has been lying to you. He doesn't love you at all. He's just using you." Meanwhile, Richard sends a message to Brian through Heather's old cell phone. In Heather's voice, "I've found out everything you've done, and I can't believe you're having an affair with another woman, and I'm going to make you pay for it." Immediately afterward, Richard anonymously reveals something to Brian about Heather's private transfer of company assets, along with some forged evidence. The evidence, though forged, very cleverly exploits the rift in trust between Heather and Brian, convincing Brian. Sure enough, Richard's plan worked. The tension between Heather and Brian quickly intensifies as they begin to second-guess, blame, and even fight each other. They both think they are the victims and the other person is the real culprit. A month later, Richard reconvened the board meeting. At the meeting, he gave an update on the company's situation and announced an important decision: that Avalon would formally sue Heather and Brian to hold them legally accountable. "We can't let people who betray the company get away with it," Richard said firmly. "We have to make them pay for their actions." Board members unanimously approved Richard's decision. They know that this is necessary to safeguard the interests of the company and is a warning to all employees. Meanwhile, Richard has formally filed for divorce with the court. In court, he presented evidence of Heather's cheating and her neglect of her family and son. Heather, for her part, tries to put the blame on Richard, accusing him of being callous and doing anything for power. But her defense pales in the face of the hard evidence Richard provides. What's more, Richard skillfully utilizes Taylor as a breakthrough. By chance, Taylor overhears a phone argument between Heather and Brian, in which Brian accuses Heather of being ready to take the blame in order to protect herself. The argument shows Taylor the true nature of Heather once and for all, and he becomes incredibly frustrated with his mother. On another occasion, Richard arranged for Taylor to overhear Heather's accusatory text messages to Brian at her home, which had been edited by Richard and were full of resentment and threats against Brian. Taylor begins to believe that her mother really did betray her father and her family. "Dad, I don't want to see Mom anymore," Taylor cried to Richard. "Why did she do it?" Richard hugged Taylor tightly, knowing that he had won a crucial step in the battle. He managed to alienate Heather and Brian, and he managed to get Taylor on his side. The court ultimately granted Richard and Heather a divorce, with custody of Taylor going to Richard. The judge harshly criticized Heather's behavior in his decision, finding her unfit to raise Taylor. Walking out of the courtroom, Richard felt a wave of relief. He knew that the battle wasn't over yet, but he had already achieved a stage victory. He glanced back at Heather, her eyes filled with despair and remorse. "You brought this on yourself," Richard said to himself in his mind. "You betrayed me and my family, and you must pay for your actions." He took Taylor's hand and walked out of the courthouse without looking back. Avalon and his family are all set for a fresh start. He's not only trying to save this company, he's trying to give his son a complete, loving home. And the revenge against Heather and Brian continues. Winning divorce proceedings and custody of his son is just one step in Richard's long road to revenge. His more important task is to lead Avalon Technologies out of the woods and take it to new heights. Not only is this Richard's testament to his self-worth, but it's also his most powerful comeback to his ex-wives, Heather and Brian. In the first few months of taking over as interim CEO, Richard faced unprecedented challenges. Inside the company, there is a lot of fear and low morale due to the scandal involving Heather and Brian. Some employees are skeptical of Richard's leadership ability and worry that he will not be able to lead the company out of the crisis. Externally, Avalon's competitors are eyeing the market and trying to capitalize on the opportunity to grab market share. Some media outlets have also expressed pessimism about Avalon's future, suggesting that the once stellar company will fall from grace. Richard knew that he had to act quickly to stabilize the situation and revive morale. He began by gathering all of the company's middle and upper management for a candid meeting. I know that the company has been through a lot of turmoil over the past while, and there are a lot of questions and concerns on everyone's mind. Richard got right to the point, but I believe that Avalon's roots are still there. Our technological advantages are still there, and our team is still there. As long as we are united, we will be able to overcome the difficulties and rebuild our glory. Richard detailed his plans for change. Avalon will refocus on technology R&D, increase investment in quantum computing, and reorganize internally by laying off some redundant departments and people to focus resources on its core business. I know that laying off employees is a painful decision, but we have to do it for the long-term development of the company. Richard's tone was firm, but I promise everyone that we will do our best to properly place every affected employee and provide them with the necessary assistance. Richard's honesty and determination touched many in the room. They began to believe that this seemingly mild-mannered engineer might actually be able to lead Avalon out of the woods. Over the next few months, Richard demonstrated his drive and ability as a leader. He personally leads the R&D team and works with engineers to overcome technical problems. He works 10 hours a day and practically lives at the office. Under his leadership, Avalon's R&D efforts made a breakthrough when they filed a series of new patents in the field of quantum computing and developed a groundbreaking prototype. At the same time, Richard is actively seeking external partnerships. He has leveraged his contacts accumulated over the years in the industry to secure several significant investments for Avalon and strategic partnership agreements with several internationally recognized technology companies. These collaborations have reinvigorated Avalon and laid a solid foundation for the company's future growth. Thanks to Richard's efforts, Avalon gradually came out of the gloom. The company's share price began a steady recovery and media coverage gradually turned positive. The industry is beginning to reassess Avalon's value, and more investors and partners are showing interest in Avalon. Of course, Richard's road to reform has not been a smooth one. Some of the laid-off employees hold a grudge against Richard, and they spread negative news about him on the internet, even trying to incite other employees to fight against him. Heather and Brian have left the company, but they're still making underhanded attempts to sabotage Avalon by any means necessary. In the face of these challenges, Richard has shown his resilience. He took those employees who spread rumors seriously and took legal action to hold them accountable. Richard, on the other hand, chooses to go cold turkey when it comes to Heather and Brian's vandalism. He knew that the best way to fight back would be to make Avalon even stronger, so that their machinations would not be defeated. In addition to the challenges at work, Richard also faces pressures on the home front. Although he wins custody of Taylor, Taylor has become quiet and even a bit rebellious due to her parents' divorce and her mother's treacherous behavior. Richard does his best to make time for Taylor, taking him to events and trying to get him out of the shadows. "Daddy, do you hate Mommy?" Taylor asked out of the blue at one point. Richard was silent for a moment and then said, "Taylor, Daddy doesn't hate Mommy. Daddy is just disappointed in her. You have to remember that even though Mommy and Daddy are separated, we will always be your family and we will always love you." Richard knew that Taylor needed time to come to terms with it all. He patiently guides Taylor, helping him to understand what happened between his parents and encouraging him to face the future with courage. At the same time, Richard realizes that an intact family is vital to Taylor's development. While he's not considering remarrying just yet, he's starting to try to build friendships with some great women in hopes of creating a healthier and more positive environment for Taylor to grow up in. Under Richard's careful care and guidance, Taylor gradually came out of the shadows. He began to become cheerful again, and his academic performance improved significantly. He began to take a keen interest in the quantum computing that Avalon was working on and often pestered Richard with questions. "Dad, isn't the quantum computer you developed many times faster than today's computers?" Taylor's eyes shone with curiosity. "Yes, Taylor," Richard said with a smile. "Quantum computers can solve many problems that traditional computers cannot, and it will revolutionize human society. Then I'm going to be an engineer like my dad and develop an even better quantum computer," Taylor said excitedly. Richard looked at Taylor with relief in his heart. He knew that he had not only won a future for Avalon, but for Taylor as well. Time passes, and 5 years have passed. Under Richard's leadership, Avalon has emerged completely from the crisis and grown to become a global leader in quantum computing. The company's market capitalization has multiplied several times, and it has become an industry legend. During these 5 years, Richard has led his team to overcome one technical challenge after another, bringing quantum computing technology from the lab to the marketplace. The quantum computers developed by Avalon are used in a wide variety of fields, including materials science, drug discovery, financial modeling, and more, and have brought great progress to human society. Richard has also become an industry sensation. His story has been picked up by major media outlets, and he has been invited to speak at tech summits around the world to share his vision for the future of quantum computing. His name has become synonymous with technology and innovation, and his experience has inspired countless young people to join the technology industry. In the meantime, Richard has reaped his own happiness. He developed a stable relationship with a woman named Sarah. Sarah is an excellent pediatrician who is gentle and kind and treats Taylor like her own. Taylor also loves Sarah, and they get along very well. Richard finally has a warm family again. Heather and Brian, on the other hand, disappeared from the public eye completely. Heather gets a normal job in Milwaukee and lives a dull, down-and-out life. She follows Avalon's news every day with a mixture of remorse and jealousy. She tries to contact Taylor, but Taylor is consistently cold to her. Brian tries to make a fresh start after his release from prison, but his past always haunts him. No company wants to hire someone with a criminal record, and he can barely make ends meet with odd jobs. He had tried to contact Heather, but Heather had shunned him. 5 years later, on a fall day, Avalon held a big celebration at its Seattle headquarters to celebrate the company's major breakthrough in quantum computing. Richard gave a passionate speech as CEO of the company. 5 years ago, Avalon went through an unprecedented crisis when many people thought that the company was finished. Richard's voice echoed over the venue. But we didn't give up. We chose to persevere and fight. Today, we can proudly say that Avalon is back. Not only are we back, but we've become even stronger. The stage erupted into an endless round of applause as everyone rejoiced in the rebirth of Avalon. After his speech, Richard walks off the stage and Catherine Olson approaches him with a smile. "Well done, Richard," Catherine said. "Your father would be proud of you." "Thank you, Catherine," Richard said gratefully. "Avalon wouldn't be where it is today without your help." The two of them smiled at each other, and it was all in the air. After the celebration, Richard took Taylor and Sarah back home. Taylor talked excitedly about all the novelties he'd seen at the celebration, while Sarah giggled softly. Richard looked at what was in front of him with happiness and gratitude. He knew that he had earned not only career success, but also family happiness. And it all started with that crisis 5 years ago, and his determination to never give up. His life, as a result of this crisis, has become more exciting and complete. He could finally say to himself that he had not only restored his revenge, but also redeemed himself. Avalon's celebration came to a close with a lot of laughter, and Richard held Taylor and Sarah's hands as they walked home. 5 years is enough time for a toddler to grow into a teenager, and for a company on the verge of bankruptcy to transform into an industry giant. But for Richard, those 5 years were more like a long journey of self-redemption, as he was reborn in the flames of vengeance and ultimately embraced a broader life. "Dad, today's speech was great," Taylor said excitedly. "I want to be a great engineer like you in the future." "I believe in you, Taylor." Richard stroked his son's head lovingly. "You're going to be better than Dad." Sarah smiled from the sidelines as she watched father and son with tenderness in her eyes. "You're all the best," she said softly. Richard held Sarah's hand tightly, his heart filled with gratitude. He knows that without Sarah's company and support, it would have been difficult for him to come out of those dark days. Sarah is not only a wonderful companion, but also a competent mother who, with her love and patience, helped Taylor come out of the shadow of his parents' divorce and gave him a warm home again. Back at the house, Richard tells Taylor and Sarah to go ahead and rest while he goes to the study alone. He turned on his computer, and the screen showed the latest chart of Avalon's stock price, a steep upward curve that symbolized the company's 5-year run. Richard's eyes moved away from the screen and landed on an old photograph on a bookshelf. It was a picture of him and his father, in which his father was in the prime of his life, full of vigor, while he was still a young teenager. Richard's father was a brilliant engineer and one of the founders of Avalon. He dedicated his life to this company, but died of an illness just as the company was approaching its glory days. Richard remembers holding his father's hand the day he passed away, and his father saying to him in a weak voice, "Richard, you have to remember that the power of technology is infinite, but only with good intentions can technology truly benefit mankind." Richard took his father's words to heart. In the past 5 years, he has always taken this as his motto, not only committed to advancing Avalon in the field of quantum computing, but also actively involved in public service, using the power of science and technology to help those in need. Richard picked up the phone and dialed Catherine Olson's number. "Catherine, thank you. You have been like a lighthouse for me these past 5 years, guiding me forward." Catherine's kind voice came from the other end of the line. "Richard, this is the result of your own efforts. Your father would be proud of you, and so am I. Is it okay if I ask you to meet me at the Old Time tomorrow? I'd like to talk to you." Richard said the Old Time was his father's favorite cafe. "Okay, Richard. There's a lot I want to say to you too." Catherine readily agreed. The next day, Richard arrived at the Old Time Cafe as promised. Located in Seattle's Old Town neighborhood, this cafe is decorated with a vintage vibe. Richard remembers his father bringing him here often when he was a kid, telling him stories about Avalon's startup and his vision for the future of technology. Catherine has taken her usual seat and is waiting for Richard. Seeing Richard walk in, she smiled and waved to him. "Catherine, you like this corner seat as much as ever," Richard said with a smile as he sat down across from Catherine. "Yeah, this place is full of memories." Catherine picked up her coffee cup and took a gentle sip. "Your father used to love to sit here and discuss the future of the company with me over a cup of coffee." The two talk about Richard's father, Avalon's past, and the future of the company. Catherine asked Richard about his next steps, and Richard said he plans to set up a foundation dedicated to supporting basic research in quantum computing, as well as supporting young scientific and technological talent. "That's an excellent idea, Richard." Catherine nodded approvingly. "Your father has always wanted to give back to the community, and I'm sure he would support your decision." The two talked for a long time until nightfall. Richard walks Catherine back to her apartment and then stops down the street for a long time. He looked up at the stars as if he saw his father smiling down at him. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away from Seattle and Milwaukee, Heather was sitting alone in her cramped rental house, watching the television coverage of Avalon's celebration. Richard is shown standing in the spotlight, spirited and accepting congratulations from the crowd. She, on the other hand, could only hide in this dark corner and lick her wounds in silence. Heather's face had long since lost its former glow, replaced by deep exhaustion and remorse. She now works as a saleswoman for an insurance company and has to make countless phone calls and look at countless blank stares every day just to make ends meet. It's not that she hasn't thought about starting over, but Avalon's light is just too bright and her past is so bad that she can't escape Richard's shadow wherever she goes. Taylor hadn't contacted her in a long time, and every time Heather called, Taylor always dealt with a few sentences coldly and hung up hastily. Heather knows that her son is completely disappointed in her and that she will never be able to repair the damage she has done to him. Heather picked up the remote and turned off the TV. She walked to the window and looked out at the strange city, her mind filled with confusion and despair. She didn't know where her future lay or how she was going to get there. And in another country, Brian is serving a prison sentence. He spends his days performing heavy manual labor and living a life of darkness. He had tried to apologize to Richard and Heather by writing letters, but he knew that he would never be forgiven by them. The high walls of the prison cut him off from the outside world and his hopes for the future. He can only live the rest of his life in memories, and remorse and pain will always be with him. Richard, 5 years later, has long since ceased to be the avenger he was when he was blinded by hatred. He learned to let go, he learned to forgive, and he learned how to love. He understands that true victory is not destroying the enemy, but rising above the hatred and living a better version of himself. Richard continues to lead Avalon's exploration of the field of quantum computing in the days ahead. He is devoting more energy to the long-term development of the company. and is committed to applying quantum computing technology to a wider range of fields to bring greater benefits to human society. Richard is also actively involved in philanthropy, having established a foundation that has funded many promising young scientists and supported a range of scientific research projects aimed at solving social problems. Richard hopes that through his efforts, technology will truly be a force for human progress. Taylor, on the other hand, is growing up healthy and happy under the loving care of Richard and Sarah. He enrolled in the computer science program at Stanford University and aspired to be an engineer as good as his father. Richard is proud of Taylor and knows that Taylor's future will be brighter than his. As for what Richard and Catherine actually talked about the day they agreed to meet, perhaps only they know. But what is certain is that it must have been a wise and enlightening conversation that pointed the way to Richard's future. Years later, Richard retired and left Avalon in Taylor's hands. He began to enjoy his retirement, accompanying Sarah as she traveled around the world to places they had longed to visit. On a warm afternoon, Richard sat in a rocking chair in his garden and watched Taylor and his children playing on the lawn. Sarah snuggled into his side, and the two of them smiled at each other, and it was all over. Richard closed his eyes and felt the warmth of the sun on his body. He knew that his life had come full circle. He experienced betrayal, revenge, and redemption. In the end, he reaps the rewards of loving and being loved, as well as inner peace. At this moment, he could finally say to himself that he had not failed his father or his life. He proved through his actions that even in the darkness, the heart must turn to the light, for only love and hope can light the way forward. And that, in turn, was the most valuable asset of his life. The story that belongs to Richard and to Avalon continues and continues into that more distant future. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.